Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and this is the CK3 FAQ analysis video, or rather it is the first of many. There is this gigantic FAQ section in the forums of Paradox and you can see it is truly gigantic. I mean it's long. And this FAQ is something that exists now because every month for the last maybe 6 or 7 months, ever since they started Dev Diaries essentially, in the official CK3 Discord they would host a live chat with the devs. You could ask questions, the dev would, select the questions and answer them. And all of those answers and questions have been compiled in this list. There are questions and answers that are very helpful. There are others that have nothing new, that don't really reiterate on something. There are some, and I will say this happens in the moment as you answer the questions quite, literally live. There are some questions that I think were misunderstood, so those answers aren't really usable either. But what matters is that there are a lot of things in this FAQ that people don't know about. Most people don't even know that this FAQ exists in the first place. What I want to do in this video and in the upcoming videos is I want to work my way through all of these topics. I marked down, as you can see, it's already, the legendary red marker has come to use, and I marked down the most important ones. I decided that something was important if it had new information, if it had information that reiterated on something and, made it so that something was clarified, for example, and I marked it as important if I personally believe that that topic deserves some additional discussion and debate. What I would like to encourage you is essentially to see this series as me talking for 20 videos per video about whatever topic opens up. Usually in these videos, especially in the CK3 related videos, I highly edit things, everything is scripted. I look at something, I'm just blasting out information, right? That is not the approach that I want to take with this series. In this series, I will take my sweet time so that in one video we could do literally 2 or 3 topics, in another we could do, let's say, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, It depends really on how heavily I want to focus on anything going on in the circumstances. So, with that being said, let's just jump straight in. I do want to reiterate, the link for this very FAQ thread is of course in the description, as is the CK3 Discord. I hang out there, a lot of cool people hang out there, a lot of interesting takes and ideas hang out there. You should definitely check it out if you're interested in the game. Now that being said, let's jump into the general questions section, shall we? And the first thing that I want to point out is that the languages that CK3 will have at launch are English, French, German, Russian, Simplified Chinese, Spanish and Korean. I think Simplified and Korean are new. I'm not entirely sure that Korean is new, but I remember distinctly, if I'm not wrong here, that Stellaris got some flack a while ago that they did not support and didn't mean to support, of course, Simplified Chinese, meaning that some people were upset that they couldn't play the game in their native language. And I mean, it's understandable. At the end of the day, I know a lot of people that play these games in their native language. For example, in Crusader Kings II, I know a lot of German people that play it in German because it does help them with immersion. When they see those ancient kind of archaic German words, nobody says Vasall, for example. Nobody says that in German in general, so the way it is, I think, is that if it is in your native language, it helps you with immersion. For me personally, it doesn't really matter. I love playing it in English and I still am immersed, but I understand it, and I also understand that despite this being a pretty wide, selection of languages, especially in comparison to, like, how are they spoken on a worldwide basis, I do understand that, for example, Polish, Italian, Turkish, Portuguese, Brazilian, and other languages have been brought up and requested by the community, but there are no plans to implement them. So if you were wondering, now you know. It also brings me to a quick anecdote. When I was at PDXCon 2019, there was this infamous sentence. Essentially, they were holding that PDXCon, of course, in Berlin, in Germany. And they were saying, if we host a PDXCon in Germany and nobody attends but the Germans, the venue will still be full. That is just how dedicated of a fan base for grand strategy games exists in Germany. So that's why, if you were wondering why, despite of course not being, a language spoken worldwide like English and French, for example, we get to have our own translation. It's just essentially a market question, I suppose. We have to see it through that, of course, as well. It is a business, so the decision to have German in there in the mix is coming from that. I hope that in the future, I very much hope that in the future, we're looking at, a lot more languages being added to this, but I think Simplified Chinese and Korean making the cut is already quite nice. Now here's the Discord link again, discord.gg/CK3. What are the starting and ending dates? You can see some of these questions were asked before, that sort of stuff was revealed in the press footage, but I want to reiterate on that topic. As it turns out, players prefer to start in 1066 or as a pagan in 867, so we decided to focus upon those dates for the release. Ending date is 1453. So, about that topic, first of all, we now know that 1453 isn't really set in stone because there is a game rule that allows you to just play past 1453 if you take, that game rule and activate it. And that is nice, but we still are sitting at 2 start dates. So that is 1066 and 867. That is the invasion of England by William the Bastard, and at the same time, of course, Harald Hardrada. But then also in 867, we have the Great Heathen Army. We have so much going on in 867. Honestly, it's like quite the active start date. Now, there has been a lot of debate about this. At the very start, you know, when it wasn't quite clarified that those would really be the only ones and not just the ones that they mentioned, before that was clarified, there was some debate because there's 2 angles on this, and one angle I understand, the other one I do not understand. So the first angle that I do not understand is essentially the angle that says, oh, you know, I really enjoyed going through every single day in Crusader Kings II. You can do that, of course, you know, I'm already loaded in here, but I could theoretically load in on the 16th September 1066 and so on and so forth, because every single date can be touched. Now, I don't really share that take that that is a good thing, because that is a lot of development time. If you've ever developed a mod, you will know this. That is a lot of development time spent just with the history province, with generating characters, with making sure that they are, you know, as close to historically accurate as possible, and in the end, they will never be historically accurate. You will particularly see this in the late start dates that you can choose like that, even the ones that are bookmarked. In 1337, for example, the Sultanate of Delhi is held exactly only by its overlord, because that's really the only one that we know anything about, and that is also the only one that then hands out all the land, and every vassal loves him, and nothing happens in his realm. It is a bit of a weird attempt, because at the end of the day, those start dates were pretty bad. I mean, they were trash, I'll be honest with you. They're still enjoyable in certain circumstances, but when it comes to an actual how often do you play these kind of point of view, then I don't think I can understand people that want those, you know, daily start dates back, or even the late bookmarks. They were entirely unbalanced in CK2, and while I think that there are avenues to balance the late game in CK3 with, you know, innovations and how development works, I do also believe that at the end of the day, we're looking at a situation where essentially the late game is something that most people don't really seek out, because all the stories are already written, you know, the Crusades have already started, nothing is groundbreaking anymore. But that aside, I'm not arguing, and I want to make this clear, I am not arguing against the idea of having more start dates, and I don't even think that the developer that answered this question is arguing against it, because so we decided to focus upon those dates for the release. That is a direct quote, you know, that is verbatim, and essentially to me this sounds like they are saying, we are not planning to implement anything else, and we haven't implemented anything else, because obviously this is, you know, for the release, we focused on exactly those so that they could be as accurate as possible, but we're not closed off to that idea to add more start dates. For example, Imperator Rome was very, very clear from the get-go that there would be no other start date than 450 AUC. And that's exactly how it's come. Now in CK3, I do think that there is a possibility that we are going to see additional start dates. I would personally love to see, for example, 936, the Alexiad would be nice, so 1081, and then of course 1204, you know, the Latin Empire, that sort of stuff. I think that is the latest, and that is also, honestly, I really wouldn't care for any other start date. Even 1081 is a bit not that dedicated. It depends. If the Seljuks could actually push into the Byzantine Empire like they did, you know, until 1081, then I think we wouldn't have a problem. We wouldn't need that start date, because we would see that start date develop naturally. Now, either way, there are a lot of different takes, a lot of different start dates that people would prefer. At the end of the day, what is your take on that? Because I personally, all that I can't understand is essentially the request of the daily kind of days to come back, you know, the daily ticks that I can select in the selection screen. I think that is complete nonsense. We don't need that. Nobody ever needed it. And I personally am honestly not too sad about, for example, 769 being gone. It was pure myth anyway. None of the borders were correct. None of the characters were correct. None of it made sense in any way. And everybody apparently forgot how to use boats, which is of course not entirely correct. Now, with that being said, that is my take on the starting and ending dates, a topic of course that we already know about. Will albinos make an appearance in CK3? Already knew this, I just wanted to remind everyone, it's pretty cool. I'm very excited to see that. Will there be cultural specific titles, say Kaiser, Vasilevs, Jarl, etc.? Yes, spawn neighbors will also have names relating to where they originate from, of York or de Tottenham, for example. Now, the thing is, we already have that. Let me just look at this fella. Von Dockum. So all of these things are something that is already in CK2. It's just nice, which is why I brought it up. It's just nice to see it reiterated, to see it come back, and to see those things make sense, because they get a bit of a regional, you know, a regional attachment there, even if the game of course doesn't understand that they are supposed to be from that location. But that's not news, just wanted to reiterate on it in case you were wondering. Will the character finder make a return, or are you going for a more organic gameplay loop when finding potential counselors or spouses? Oh yes, we have a new and improved character finder. Now we already saw a bit of that in the past. It is improved, there are more filters, there are filters that you can, you know, apply easier. This is the old CK2 finder here. It is something that needs to be said, and I want to do this kind of in a tandem here, that if you look at this in CK2 and you invite someone to your court, you know, for example, based on their martial stats, on their diplomacy stats, because you want to make them either an educator or maybe you want to make them simply a counselor, that is of course not exactly realistic. It wasn't that at some point Kaiser Heinrich IV looked amongst his court and said, "You there, do you know someone that is good at diplomacy, that can serve me as a chancellor?" And then they was like, "Oh, you know what, in Genfergau there's this one guy, he's a lowball and his name is Loop." That never happened. It makes no sense. It's of course completely nonsensical, but it is a very valuable gameplay mechanic, so you can't really take that out. The way I see this is that at the end of the day, I'm very happy with the idea that they are including the character finder, because it enables a gameplay that, or a gameplay decision that shouldn't be taken away from the player. It makes perfect sense to have this opportunity. But at the same time, they also say, and I think they say this later down there as well, we're gonna see it, but they also say that to actually invite someone to your court will be harder. Because of course, when someone is living somewhere and, you know, then this random guy says, "Hey, want to live at my court?" Nothing guaranteed, but you can live here if you want to. You're not going to say yes immediately, unless, you know, for example, it's the emperor calling, in which case, okay, I get it, but most of the time you would not go to this random fellow over there. So they said they just made it a bit more difficult. They give more reasons for why someone should stay in a court. For example, if they believe that their claim can be pushed or that they can find a good marriage, etc., etc., all of those things will be in. So I am very, very happy to see that both the character finder playstyle, where you essentially, you know, try to breed, are enabled, although harder, but also the playstyle that allows you to just natively and organically get more people to become your counselors, etc., etc. You can also, of course, still invite people. That decision does still exist. Will the characters have their own voices? Characters don't have voices, God bless. That's the answer that we all needed to see, I think. How are disabilities, be it mental or physical, represented? I saw this question in particular before we get to the answer. I saw it a couple of times just in recent days. Mostly because people were like, are you actually going to depict it? Because like in CK2 you didn't really, and I just want to address that. I think that is a bit incorrect. In CK2 you had, for example, you had PTSD. I think possessed and lunatic can be interpreted in various ways, be it, you know, schizophrenia, be it general madness, be it anything really that you want to interpret into that, be it, you know, actual physical disabilities, etc., etc. And then of course you had, you know, you might lose a leg, an eye, an arm, etc., etc. And that is something that already was in CK2. Now PTSD obviously wasn't called PTSD, but we all remember that event, right, where your ruler goes into a battle and then, oh, I feel so lost here, and then it says you will feel this, or the repercussions of this event later. And then later you get an event, you know, you could either commit suicide, for example, you could become celebratory, or you could go on and just become a very aggressive drunkard. So all of these mechanisms of coping are essentially mechanisms describing someone that is under pressure of PTSD. And I can only assume in general that of course we're going to deal with a stress system in CK3, and it is a much more realistic approach to this. But let's get to the actual answer here, as respectfully as possible. While they do have character penalties associated with them, we strove to ensure that penalties were as medically accurate and took care to avoid falling back on stereotypes. So I think this is actually quite nice, because it goes a bit deeper into the entire system, and I think combined with the stress system, we don't just get this, you know, 3 decisions sort of thing, where it's like, oh, you know, what is your decision as your response to the PTSD that you have developed in battle. And that is just one of the examples, of course. There are other illnesses, there are other disabilities that can be approached like this. I think the stress system is a huge help in bringing this to life and in making it believable, in making your character appear like a person instead of just a code of strings, random numbers that, you know, you can control. I really like the idea here, but I really want to clarify, it is not like CK2 didn't deal with these topics. It's just that CK3 has a much more fleshed out approach to it. Now, will there be a rework to the political concerns modifier when making alliances and marriages, etc.? This is the most important part of this section of the Q&A as far as I'm concerned, because they say all of those modifiers are scripted now and the exact reason breakdown is shown. This is absolutely gorgeous. You can always suspect that in CK2, if someone says no to your alliance, if someone says no to your non-aggression pact, if someone says no to your marriage, that they essentially have a modifier that is either, you know, hey, maybe I want to have someone that is more powerful. Maybe I want, you know, to conquer you. So I don't want to ally you because I would like to conquer you later on. But you would always have to infer those things. You would have to extrapolate those things from what you see in the world. You couldn't actually tell. Now in CK3, all of this is scripted, meaning that everybody has a bit of a slightly different, you know, political concerns modifier, and that modifier is now also actually broken down for you. I really love that, because that means that I can actually work on the relationship with someone. If I, for example, were to no longer hold the border region that they desire, you know, for some reason or another, then I could go on and could just say, all right, I gave that up and now let's be friends. That is a thing that I missed in CK2. Whenever someone said political concerns, all I would do is I would give them money, I would give them artifacts, I would, you know, start to sway them, all those things, but it is all quite uncommitted. I don't know why I'm actually swaying them. I don't know why I'm doing these things, because they're not telling me why they don't want an alliance. In CK3, that will change. I think that is huge for roleplay, because it means that our characters can actually make decisions based on the intentions on other rulers. I think that is very, very cool. Now, that being said, let's move on to dynasties and houses. Are AI characters motivated to create houses of their own, so we get to see some glorious sprawling dynasties duking it out, pun very much intended, in most games? And the answer is, oh, very much so. I'm really excited for this, because something that worries me about the very complex systems of CK3, and yes, they are considerably more complex than what we have in CK2, in most cases anyway, but something that worries me about those is that there's always a risk in which essentially we're looking at a system that the AI doesn't use or understand. And the prime example for this, and I don't mean to rib on Imperator at all. I like Imperator. People that were here in the channel when Imperator came out know that I actually really enjoyed the Warfare 4, you know, which was for me personally a surprise, because I'm not a big Warfare person in these games. I'm a roleplay person. But that aside, Imperator had or has this mechanic that, to my knowledge, still is not used by the AI, and that is problematic. That is highly problematic, and that mechanic is a very cool one. That mechanic is the tribal migration mechanic. As far as I know, at least it was true, and I know this for a fact, it was true at, you know, release. I don't know whether it is still true. I heard that they are working on it, but I can't really confirm that. Maybe you can. Let me know in the comments. God damn it, Discord. Let me know in the comments. But the way I see this, the migration mechanic in Imperator Rome is not used by the mechanic because it is simply too complex. There are too many variables. Things are a bit weird. And that is highly problematic, because at the end of the day, you're looking at a situation where the player never needs to calculate that in. They never need to think about, you know, the enemy doing that, the AI actually coming and migrating and settling, etc., etc. And I do not want that for CK3. The way I see it, any game that has mechanics should have those mechanics both for the player and the AI, so that when I look over into an AI realm and understand what is going on, I can understand it because I understand it for myself. So if I, for example, look at France and I see, you know, a faction uprising, I can understand what drives that faction, how it could be encouraged, how that faction could be strengthened, for example, by sowing dissent, etc., etc., and then I can do that. Imagine if the AI didn't use the faction system against AI, and you could never really see, hey, what is actually happening, until it was already too late. I think that is something that we need to avoid, and I'm very happy to see that, especially the entire thing about creating houses, because it gives so much flavor to the actual dynasties in CK3. I'm very happy to see it confirmed that this is very widely in use in the CK3 AI. Will cadet branches' shields have representation of the founding house's coat of arms like the cadet branches of House Bourbon? That is something that they here confirm. Cadet branch coat of arms are partially based on the house they split off from. The rest that it is based on is essentially the county in which they were founded. So that's a pretty cool thing. I really like that idea. I think it's very much worthwhile checking out, and I think it is something that can be modded in, or not modded in, but that can be modified in, you know, for example, whether it takes something from a county, from a duchy, from the kingdom it was founded on, etc., etc. I really like the idea because it localizes those houses and makes it so that, you know, they have a bit of a base where they start out from, where they're centered from, and where their base of power is. And I can already, we're 18 minutes in, Jesus, man, I am, you know, I'm really going far too much in depth here, but I hope that that is okay. If you're interested, by the way, in this format, or if you would rather me condense this a bit more, then let me know in the comments as well. Is it possible for you to lose the status of the head of the dynasty by family conflict, for example, like a younger brother fighting you for it? Technically, yes, if that brother forms their own house and becomes more powerful than you. The question is kind of avoided by the answer, but the answer is more true to reality. So the question is essentially, hey, if I am the head of the house, can somebody fight me for it? And the answer to that is no. And that has to be made very clear. Historically speaking, nobody stood up and said, I am the head of the house now. Nobody, you know, got up and said, I will fight you for being the head of the house. I will bring my troops and we will beat you up. Head of the house was a position you just were. You simply were respected. Sorry, not head of the house, head of the dynasty. You simply were respected as the head of the dynasty. It's this famous phrase from the show that shall not be named that goes something like, no king that has to state that he is a king is a king. And it's the same principle there. Of course, there is an accepted family leader, but that head of the dynasty simply is the head of the dynasty because of their power. If somebody becomes more powerful, the heads of the family, of course, will turn to that person. So, in fact, this answer, again, is avoiding the question, but it is hitting the mark by making it clear that, of course, head of the dynasty isn't like a literal title. You know, sometimes it might be mentioned, but most of the time it's organic. Most of the time people understand who is the head of the dynasty. And with that, of course, if your brother splits off, forms a house that is stronger than you, everybody in your family will turn towards him instead of towards you. So technically it can coincide that I fight my brother, weaken him, and then become the head of the dynasty, but I didn't actually fight him for the head of the dynasty thing. I really like that. I like the approach that the team is taking in general, in understanding that some of these titles are not literal titles. They are simply an understanding of hierarchy that is ingrained in families. Now, with that being said, I can't believe that we only managed to get through 2. Oh my god, are you kidding me? We got through 2 topics. Let me know whether this is too slow for you. Let me know whether you want a different format. I like doing it like this because I can, you know, go on a bit of a tangent every now and again on these topics. If you would like to see it more condensed, do let me know about it. I will, of course, see the analytics for the video and we'll go from there. But for the moment, I would like to thank the members of the channel that are making videos such as this one possible. Namely the Barons, Aaron, Stefan, the Richest T, Snowwolf, Thomas, Mitchell, MFV, Florian, Dan, the Murcielago, Jacob, Rex Romanorum, Falling Phoenix, and Eterna. Then, of course, also the Counts, Shifty, Wombat, Kazan, and Lachlan. And last but not least, the absolutely beautiful Duke, Suspicious Duck, Nathan, Jack, Kenneth, Alexo, my bad, Goodfield, Eric, Aiden, and Kiriana. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel, and I will see you in, you know, a later episode of this series, maybe in a bit of a different format, maybe with the same format. Let me know in the comments. Very important to me, of course, to get your feedback. With that being said, later, alligator.